fantasy team preview, taking a look at the DFS implications that they bring to the table this year, which obviously it doesn't seem like a lot, but there's a handful of options there. It's not the greatest, but
it's literally just all over the place. It's just everyone's players are fat, players are getting suspended, everyone's injured. It's just like Tyrod Taylor is even the starter. Like, it's just all, and Rex Ryan is just mumbling, bumbling, and stumbling around over there. So it's just a mess. It's just a classic Rex Ryan mess. They do have some really talented players, though. So I think there is going to be a lot of weeks where there are some really good fantasy options on this team, especially in terms of tournaments. But yeah, it's going to be just a hot mess pretty much all year.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, you look at their offense last year. I mean, they ran more than any other offense in the league, which you kind of expected because they had a trio of kind of running backs that they felt confident using. And obviously, given the fact that they have Tyrod Taylor, who's a mobile quarterback, that's kind of expected too. So they rushed 32 times per game last year. I think that's kind of an intriguing number because there will be some favorable matchups this year where they'll have a kind of a heavy run game and rely on that defense, which is a pretty decent defense. So I'm kind of curious to see if they do focus on the run still, even though there is a lot of question marks.
I think they definitely will, and we're going to see a lot of games early on where LeSean McCoy gets a lot of carries. I mean, 15 to 20 a game, I think, is a pretty reasonable expectation. And okay, so the backup running back is going to be where we make our decisions and where it becomes tough. If McCoy does go down, obviously in those first few games, it's going to be a complicated situation. They brought in Jonathan Williams from Arkansas. He was sort of a later round pick. And they also have Mike Gillislee, who it sounds like has been doing really well in training camp. So he's a guy that you might want to check out. And he played really well in a small sample size as well. But then we have this man, Carlos Williams, so David Johnson was the guy that sort of got all the credit for being super highly efficient with touchdowns. But I mean, Carlos Williams had 104 touches and scored 11 touchdowns, or 9 touchdowns. Sorry, I'm exaggerating to make my point, apparently. But the point is he scored a touchdown on every 10 touches, basically. And a guy like that, he's uber talented. He was the same way in college where he would just show these crazy potential moments and then just disappear. He ended up sort of testing out well athletically, got drafted in the 5th round. He's a former safety, and he has all the tools. It's kind of like Martavis Bryant, where if you can get him on the field, yes, it's great. He's going to be awesome, but is he going to be on the field? Obviously suspended 4 games, came into camp 25 pounds overweight. It's just like, if he's in there, yes, you want to play him, especially if McCoy's out. It's just if he's going to be there.
And that's the biggest thing. I mean, at this point, you're looking at this Bills backfield, which obviously is the focal point of this offense, just in fantasy terms alone. And you look at McCoy, I mean, the touchdowns have been somewhat, lackluster over his last few years. I mean, just 3 last season. I mean, obviously, you just talked about Carlos Williams and the 9 he had. So, I mean, McCoy, it's like that big upside play. I mean, is it quite there anymore? I don't really think so. I'm not kind of buying into it. Could he put together a decent game where maybe he goes 75 yards, maybe 100 of, kind of all-purpose yards and maybe grab a touchdown? But him in the red zone, I mean, he hasn't really been that efficient.
No, he hasn't. I just think the volume will average things out for him. But obviously injuries have been a concern as well as the touchdowns this year. So there's definitely risk that comes with him. Certainly not going to be a cash option for me, at least in the first few weeks, just based on sort of what we've seen. But Tyrod Taylor, I mean, we've seen running quarterbacks sort of increase the ceiling of sort of running backs in offenses that they're successful. So, I mean, you just go back to when Michael Vick was dominant. That was the year McCoy really went off. So I think there's a lot of stuff like that you have to take into account with McCoy, but at the same time, temper expectations.
Yeah, I think so too. And then we can kind of transition into Tyrod Taylor, who at Weeks last year was, a solid fantasy quarterback, and he
My
was
God.
yeah, I mean, that was the thing. I mean, he was a kind of a Twitter sensation at times, and also there were some lows, just given the fact that he was a little bit banged up towards the end of the season there, of course, and obviously, once Sammy Watkins kind of became that force-fed role, which I think really needs to happen again this year. He needs to be DeAndre Hopkins as far as targets from last year. I mean, that's just what needs to happen, because outside of him, I know, Robert Woods, who we'll get into, Charles Clay are kind of really there, but they do lack kind of a lot of secondary, positions on the other side of him.
Yeah, and obviously Robert Woods is the only other prominent receiving option in that passing game. Obviously Charles Clay is there. He's sort of the all-purpose guy, though. He's a good blocker. They used him weirdly last year for how much money they gave him, but I just see him as an all-around guy. Like, he's just a good football player, and that doesn't necessarily always translate to fantasy points. So I like Charles Clay. We share the same last name. He's a great guy. But he went to college with my buddy Brendan Marion, Tulsa, so that's cool. But other than that, I mean, I think we're just looking at Woods and Watkins as the prominent guys in this offense. And like you mentioned, I think the most effective way to do this is to get Watkins in there and get him at least 120 targets this year.
Yeah, I think so. And talking about Clay, I mean, generally you want tight ends to be kind of dominant threats inside the red zone, which Clay is not. I mean, just 7% of the targets last year inside the red zone. I mean, that's just three targets last year inside the 20, which is kind of a bummer when you're looking for kind of a high upside touchdown type tight end. And that's kind of something where the Bills really lacked was red zone last year, just because, one, they didn't really force, Sammy Watkins into a roll down there where, let him go get it. They used Woods a little bit down there, but obviously he's not really a big, threat wide receiver down low. So I'm just curious to see how this kind of shapes up outside of Watkins, and kind of really how they use really just his passing game in general. I think it's one of the major question marks of the Bills, which there are, numerous of them.
Yeah, absolutely. In terms of this team for DFS, though, Watkins going to be a tournament guy. I don't know how much cash he's going to be in for me this year, though.
Yeah, I don't think so either, especially with that division. I mean, obviously, Jets and Patriots, two tough defenses. I mean, you're playing them 4 times. And look at their schedule. I mean, they're one of that teams where they go play Arizona, Pittsburgh, Cincinnati. Kind of a tough, Seattle as well. I mean, that's a tough schedule for the Bills. They're going to have a lot to kind of deal with. And we said that was kind of okay with the Jets who face the same teams, but that's because they do have Decker and Marshall. There's no one on the other side of Watkins who can kind of help to take the pressure off of them.
Yeah, no, definitely agree. And he should have some down games just because of the way teams play him. Some teams are just going to throw 2 guys on him and then have a safety over the top. So that's going to be some unfortunate weeks for him. But in that case, they'll probably rely on the run.
Yeah, definitely. And I think overall, our general overview of the Bills is just going to be a GPP team to target on a week-to-week basis. I mean, I don't really see anyone cash game viable unless, maybe Taylor's in a good spot where, he's cheap and in good matchup. But outside of that, I don't see anyone kind of cash game worthy.
Definitely.
So that's going to wrap things up with our Bills team preview. Be sure to check out our rest of our team content at dailyfantasycafe.com.